as we came about new Germans, they'd have their own weapons, oftentimes machine gunners shooting toward us, but if a machine gunner shot toward us, they would give away their position. It's easy to see where the bullets were coming from. And so when they shot, they would be inviting attacks by our soldiers to get them in their position. And so we wiped out machine gunners as they appeared. And so sure enough then, they took us back after about 5-6 days of this to rest a little bit. And we went into a barn and started a fire. This had been a French barn, but they had vacated it and because of the war being there and gone back to other relatives in more secure places in France. So sure enough there, then we'd go for the night, lay on the floor with our feet toward a fire we had built in the pot-bellied stove in the middle of the room, just to keep our feet warm. Well, turns out that was a mistake. The next morning, a lot of us couldn't walk. Our feet were all swollen from having been frozen, and when every step we took would hurt a lot. And so and we couldn't get our shoes on because our feet were too big, swollen. And so sure enough, we found our way back to the medic tent. And I do remember being there in the medic tent, and I remember saying, a doctor came around and said, "Oh, they're pretty bad." I said, "Well, give me a pair of shoes with the toes cut out, and I'll go back, you know?" He says, "Oh, no, I can't let you do that because I have an oath to take care of people when they're sick, when they're hurt. And so you're not going back." And I said, "What are you going to do with me?" He said, "You're going to a hospital." So then I was sent back by an ambulance to a nearby railway station and taken on a stretcher into a train, and we filled up the floor of the train, and then we could hang stretchers on the walls too high over and above the one on the floor. And so that's the way we got in a train. We had a whole train load of injured soldiers, and they took us to Paris, and there they had a hospital ward which was 100% empty, and they took us in there and put us in beds with our feet sticking out the bottom, and every day the doctors would come, and it was touch and go whether or not they would amputate toes. If this had happened a couple of months earlier, they would have amputated to keep the toe from getting infected with what they call gangrene. Gangrene meant infected, you know, and so they thought that people would lose their toes if they left them like that. But the doctors were watching it every day, and it turns out that underneath the ends of the toes, we were growing healthy tissue, but the end of the toe was like one big thick scab, maybe a quarter of an inch thick on the ends of the toes, and those scabs fell off, leaving fresh, healthy toes underneath, but a little shorter than the others. And so, and a lot of us were that way. So we were there in that hospital for, a couple of weeks. And then they said, well, we need these beds for newly injured people. So they were bringing in injured soldiers, and they said, we're taking you by plane to England, and we're putting you in another hospital in England, which we vacated for this. So they took us on stretchers to the plane and hung us from the walls on the side of a big cargo plane, and maybe too high, laying there horizontally, and then the plane took us off and flew us from Paris to England. And then in England, they put us in ambulance again, put us back on another hospital ward. And we were there for a while, and then the doctor said, "You're not going back into the battle anymore. We're gonna make arrangements to send you back to the United States because it's cheaper and better to have you in a hospital in the United States compared to one in England. And we need these beds for newly injured soldiers." And so, again, leaving me in a stretcher, they took me to an ambulance, and then from the ambulance to a ship, I think to Southampton. And there in Southampton, there was a hospital ship waiting for us, and I was able by then to walk around. I should say hobble around. I could walk on my heels and get up and go for meals and that, and go to the bathroom. And so sure enough, we do that across the Atlantic back to Camp Butler, North Carolina, and that was a great big military base with a hospital on it. And we went there, and I was there for another 5 months maybe, learning how to walk again. And then finally one day, one of the doctors said, "We gotta tell you what we're thinking about for you. You're no use to us as a soldier. We gotta figure out a way to get you well enough to get you home, and then you're done. You're out of the army." And so I said, "What about the rest of my guys?" And he said, "Well, they gotta do without you, that's all." And so then one day, they came around with all the papers to give me an honorable discharge, injured in action, and then they gave me I think a couple $100 to help me pay for getting home by train, and I did that, and then when I went home, I kind of surprised my mother because she didn't expect me to get out like that, but I was told that start to put together your life as a civilian. And so what I did then is talk to people about work, and there was a group of grocery stores called the WWII stores that was very strong on Long Island and in Brooklyn, but not too much beyond that. And so they gave me a job to work there, and because of my feet, they arranged me to put a seat at the cash register at the front. Now they do that routinely for a lot of people in a grocery store. You see them sitting there at the front taking money. Well, I was one of the first to do that. And meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, well, you can't give up on the idea of going to college. So I applied to go to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI. A lot of you know that. It's in Troy, New York, and it's quite popular in this part of the country. And they accepted me, and that's where I would go next. So, so my military career was over, and I could walk if I was careful, and as you see, when I came in, I was able. I was in the chair, the wheelchair, but I walk around the house now, from my bedroom to the kitchen to a sitting place, and I walk small distances normally. So I'm practically 100% cured. I'm pretty lucky that way. And you know, you're all lucky too. Here you live in the best country in the world has ever seen. And that's your home. And it's a good place to live. What do you think? Isn't this a good place to live?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's good. And we're all lucky to have people like you coming along to take over our place as we get too old. As my daughter Kathy told you, I'm 94. Or as I play for a joke, that's a pretty good start. And so sure enough, I don't have a lot of years left, but I'm doing my best to enjoy them and do what I can for people. And so that's about
Good.
my story,
That's
Kath,
good.
okay?
Yep, maybe you